There's only 24 hours in a day. I got a pair of earbuds and I wish there was a way that I could know just what I want to listen to. There's 150,000 shows that I'm not sitting through. When the world is dark and boring, let us do your exploring. Pod on pod. Pod on pod.
Welcome to Pod on Pod, a guide to the world of podcasts because it's not your daddy's radio. We're your hosts.
I'm Josh.
And I'm Joel. This week we're going to be talking about Tell 'em Steve Dave.
Woohoo!
That's right. Tell 'em Steve Dave, a member of the Smodco network, not the Smodcast network. Smodcast is a podcast.
That's correct.
Smodco is a network.
And this show should get you popping.
This it's probably the number one show that you've requested, even above Harmontown.
Yeah, because Harmontown's new. This one I've been listening to for years.
As long as you've listened to podcasts. This was one of the first ones you started, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Tell 'em Steve Dave. At the center of this show are two of Kevin Smith, the patriarch of the Smodco family, two of his oldest buddies, Brian Johnson and Walter Flanagan. You may know them as Fanboy and Steve Dave from Mallrats. That's where I was first introduced to these guys.
And more recently from Comic Book Man on AMC.
Yeah, I forget. They're way more famous now because they're on television than that little indie film from the early 90s. You know them as the Comic Book Men. It's Brian Johnson, Walter Flanagan, and then Brian Quinn is the other mainstay of the show.
Of Impractical Joker fame.
Yeah, and actually he's from another podcast we've reviewed before, What Say You?
Yeah.
With Brian and Quinn, the other member of that podcast. So this one, though, started out of Smodcast, actually. What happened was the two hosts of Smodcast, Kevin Smith and Scott Mosier,
have to take a break.
Occasionally had to take a break. In particular, Scott was off on, I can't remember what he was doing at the time, but he was doing some other work outside, away from Kevin and their partnership. And so Kevin was like, hey, I'm going back east anyway. Why don't I set up a recording with my buddies, Walt and Bry? And that turned into this show because there was such a reaction from the Smodcast audience looking for more. So, Josh, what is it that you love about this show so much?
I love the balance of personalities and the juxtaposition that creates.
I love an old friendship explained, exploited, and endeavored into every week. I like the fact that these guys have such a long-standing relationship. They've known each other, effectively all of their lives, since they were teenagers.
Yes.
And they're now, middle-aged men, 40-year-old men.
Brian and Walt, at least. Quinn, Q, didn't come until later.
Yeah. Q's the sort of the third wheel, but that's almost like your avenue into this relationship that's at the core of the show.
Yes.
Because it really is. It's Walt and Bry that the show is built around. Walt is a hardworking businessman. He runs the comic book shop, of course, as seen on Comic Book Men, Jay and Silent Bob's Secret Stash in Red Bank, New Jersey. And I probably should know the address by now. They say it often enough. But also, Brian is, perhaps the most curmudgeonly man in America.
I will not disagree with that. But the man has his reasons.
Sure he does. Well, first of all, as we know recently, or maybe you don't know more recently, but it's been exposed. If you're a follower of the TV show, then you probably have heard about Brian's substance abuse issues. He dealt with painkillers for a long time.
Yeah.
Because of back issues. Legitimately, it was his start, but then it became a substance abuse issue. But he's dealt with
depression.
That. He does. Suffers from depression. A lot of family issues at the core of his problems. Father issues, mother issues, lots of rough, troubled backstory for Brian. Now, Walt is almost exactly the opposite of that.
He is my Captain America.
Yeah, he really is like the salt of the earth. Like when I think about average blue-collar Joe, Walter Flanagan is exactly what I think about.
That's right. So you have pretty two extremes right there. And then you have Quinn that rides that middle pretty nicely. He's the average guy. He's what most of us are.
Well, the other thing that I think that he really brings to the table is something that you and I saw in our comedy podcast whenever we would have a guest. You and I hosted a show every week, and we'd mostly just talk about whatever came into our heads, try to crack some jokes and make you blush with a little bit of salty language now and again. We'd bring in a guest, though, and left and right they were dropping bombs of humor because they weren't having to push the content. Right. They're just able to sit over the side and see an opening and then attack it. And that's what I think Brian does most often.
Quinn. We'll call him Q.
Q.
Brian,
there you go.
Yeah. We'll call Brian Quinn. We'll call Brian Johnson Bry. And we'll call Walter Flanagan Walt.
There you go.
Walt Bry Q. Done.
Now you know who everybody is. In case you don't know who we are, Josh and Joel here at Pod on Pod like to every week review a new podcast for you, trying to help you find your new favorite show. And the way we do that is by breaking the show down into 4 categories: audio quality, host likability, production values, and then the content itself. First, let me tell you a little background on Tell 'em Steve Dave. It's a weekly podcast. It's released on Fridays on the Smodco network, as we said earlier. The hosts, Brian Johnson, Walt Flanagan, Brian Quinn. They're occasionally joined by Ming Chen, who also works on the Comic Book Men show. On occasion, the group is joined by Sunday Jeff, who works the Sunday shift at the comic book shop. Jeff was also the host on another of the Smodco shows, Puck Nuts, which is all about hockey. And this show started in, well, let's see, when did
February
it start?
2010.
February 2010. So they've been running for 4 years now and change. 214 episodes as of early September 2014. There's also 13 bonus episodes, which can be purchased on their Bandcamp page. Some of the bonus episodes include Puck Nuts episode and Christmas specials as well.
Here's the cool thing about the bonus episodes.
Okay.
Is they're not always, like you can purchase them now, but like if you're listening as they happen. So, for example, if you watch Comic Book Man, they came out with Cryptozoic Man, and they had a package deal. And if you ordered that package deal, you got a special bonus pod. So it's different things like that of how you get the pods if you're following along and listening. And if you don't, then you always have the opportunity to go and purchase them and listen to them.
So that's a little background on the show. You can find the show at smodcast.com and just look for Tell 'em Steve Dave. It's generally the 3rd or the 4th show right there at the top because it is one of the more popular of the network shows. Let's go ahead and start breaking the show down. Audio quality first. Right off the top, compared to Smodcast, compared to even Hollywood Babylon, which is a live comedy show, but it's recorded professionally every week, compared to... I'm trying to think about another, well, even What Say You? Maybe it's just having too many hosts. Maybe it's the loosey-goosey nature of these 3 guys. I don't know.
It could be the fact that it's recorded in the back of a comic book store.
Maybe that has something to do with it. Audio quality is not great on this show. And it varies a lot.
Okay, first off, I'm going to use, it's not bad. It's not unlistenable. It's just not consistent. Sometimes
I'll agree.
It's great. Sometimes it's not great. And it's hard to get good quality when you got Ming Chen sabotaging.
Does Ming actually edit the episodes?
No, it's Brian does the edit, and then it gets sent to Declan for any post-production and polishing up.
Huh. All right.
Did I say Brian Quinn or Brian Johnson?
You said Brian Johnson.
Okay, that's who it is.
I think you said that. You meant Brian Johnson, and
yes.
I knew that because Brian has. Now that I think about it, Brian has mentioned in some of the episodes that I listened to, "Hey, I'm spending all this time after the show editing and putting it together." Blah 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 blah. So that's audio quality. Well, let's go straight to host likability then. Of the 3 guys, who's your favorite?
Walt, hands down, not even close.
Yeah, we've already both agreed and showed our hands there. I called him the salt of the earth, and you called him Captain America. I think it's clear who we love.
Oh my man, if more Americans were like Walt Flanagan, oh man, the things we would do.
You know what?
We would be amazing. We would be the superpower that we have always wanted to be.
In the description of this week's episode, I'm going to say Josh and Joel ponder a world in which more Americans are like Walt Flanagan.
Yeah.
No, I agree with you. Now, Brian Johnson, I said he was the most curmudgeonly man in America. I've got a long relationship with Brian Johnson through Smodcast, through early episodes of this show. When it first started, I listened because I was a avid and religious Smodcast listener. I've listened to every episode of Smodcast that he's been on. I love the movies, and I love these guys from the very beginning. The Tell 'em Steve Dave scene in Mallrats is one of my favorite moments of all time in any movie. Like these two guys attacking, it was Jason Lee's character,
Right.
Brody, about the Stan Lee appearance at the comic book shop later or whatever. If you've never seen Mallrats, you got to go back and watch this movie. Or they show up in Clerks the animated series as well. These two characters, I love them. Fanboy and Steve Dave are amazing, and I know those people in real life, and so that carried through into the podcast, et cetera, et cetera. I'm predisposed to like Brian Johnson. I do not like the way they contort this podcast every week, and I know some of it is done for show, some of it's just the nature of their relationship, but like it seemed like every episode I listened to started with about 20 minutes of them complaining to one another, like yelling and fussing at each other.
There have been moments of that. I mean, it is not every episode. But when you're friends with somebody so long, that can be the nature of that relationship of, hey, I've called you out. Now I'm going to call you out in front of everybody and try to hold you accountable.
Kind of like you and I did right before we started recording this show.
Mostly, but a lot like Jay and Silent Bob Get Old for Jason Mewes.
Yes.
Call him out every week in front of everybody. Keep that guy sober.
Yes. Well, and there in particular, there's obviously good reason to do that. The other host, Brian Quinn, you and I already like this guy. We've talked about him before on What Say You. But here, I think he just fits in perfectly as that third wheel to kind of spice things up, to every now and again throw in the extra joke.
And Q and Briar much closer than Q and Walt.
That makes sense. That makes sense.
Much closer.
Why is that? Like, did that just happen outside of the entertainment industry, or do they work together?
I think a lot of it probably has to do with Walt being the family man, has kids, has a wife, doesn't like to fly, and Bry and Q, being single, having the freedom to do what they want to do back in the day.
One of the things I should say that really lightens up Brian Johnson or his character is the fact that you occasionally get glimpses into his life with his niece.
Yes.
He has a special needs niece, am I right?
Yeah, which is
they don't talk about it a lot.
Which is kind of some episodes they do. It's heavy in some episodes, but I don't understand how a guy like Bry can have such love and adoration for Sage and find the wonder and beauty that's her, and still go through the depressions and troubles and battle the demons that he seems like he's in constant battle within himself.
I feel the same way about how can you feel that love and wonderment of the universe through the person of your niece and not expand that out to your fellow human beings. Like, hey, everybody feels this way about their kids. It turns out everybody feels this way about their loved ones too. Like, maybe I should just be nicer in general to people. That never occurs to him.
No.
Yeah. So I don't know. It's a balancing act there. Of the three, by far Walter Flanagan's the best guy. Brian Johnson might be
dude. They're all
good guys.
Yes.
I don't mean to say they're not good guys, but Brian Johnson might be the most interesting of the three. Walt Flanagan's the nicest.
I agree.
Okay. Now let's talk a little bit about production values. These guys have. First of all, I realized about the third time that I had heard the theme song that they do exactly what we used to do with the theme song of our comedy podcast.
Yes.
It's a little music and then a bit from the show.
Yep.
And a little music and a bit from the show. And it's not always from this episode, and it's not always the same bits. It seems to be random funny things.
No, I think it's always from that episode.
Is it always from that episode?
Pretty sure.
Maybe I was wrong on that. But the point is, as much as I like that idea, I dislike their music that much. It's metal. It's heavy metal music. I think that's the main reason I don't like it. I just don't care for that style. But it's a little overpowering, and it is really dissonant with the humor. Like, joke. Joke.
Dude, sometimes it's not always like it's not a comedy podcast. It's not.
I know.
Okay, so you can't hold it to that standard.
Well, but the theme song and that bit would imply it's going to be not a laugh riot maybe, but largely about the yucks, and it's almost not about the yucks.
Like
at
it's won awards, but I don't think it's ever won awards for a comedy podcast. It's won like arts and entertainment and pop culture, but I don't think it's won an award for comedy.
They did, actually. I'm looking at the citation right here. They've won 2 podcast awards in 2010, one for People's Choice and the other for Best Comedy. The show was named 2010 Audio Podcast by iTunes, winners of the 2012 Stitcher Award for Best Entertainment and Pop Culture Podcast. There you go. Production values other than the theme song, though, it's mostly in and out. Here's the problem, though.
Here, that's not always like.
That's not true? Well, you tell me what's more.
Well, you
like.
have different bits, and so I don't like overproduced shows.
We know that for a fact.
Don't like it, but what does kind of tickle me is when like Walt calls for a production, and they have to call Declan out by name, and I'm sure they tag it.
Right.
But like for the Baron von Flanagan section.
Yes.
He always has to call out, all right, Declan, lightning bolt or thunderclap. Like he's happened to direct a guy living over in England. Declan lived for a while in Ireland, but now lives in England because of a lady. But having to direct that production doesn't take me out of a podcast like it normally does.
But if Declan deleted the direction.
Yeah, I wouldn't like it so much.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, see, my example of that was in the 3 episodes that I listened to, by the way, which I did not mention. Every week here on Pod, we like to listen to at least 3 episodes of a podcast. We feel like it takes that many at least for you to get a sense of what the show is like and how you might fit in with its general...
sensibilities.
Yeah, exactly. And whether or not you can get some of the in-jokes. It really takes a couple of shows to get that. Now, you didn't listen to just 3. You've listened to this every week pretty much.
Yeah.
I listened to episode 12, which is called Making Hay. I listened to episode 115, Horny in the Pants, and episode 157, Let the Games Begin. In episode 157 in particular, there's a lot of production because they play games. It's Pod Wars.
Yeah.
There's 3 different groups or 4 different groups that are playing all of these different games. They start with the Family Feud game.
Yeah.
They ask the question, and they've got topics on the board. You get to choose one, hey, and was it this? And if the guy says, no, that's not on the board, and literally... Walt would go, and then there would be the X sound from Family Feud after he went,
Yeah.
Or he would go ding, and then there would be a bell, and you would get the points. It was ridiculous that they would do both. And I didn't even realize that he was calling out a secondary production guy. My question is, though, why would they not want, why would someone, if Brian is editing it, and then a second guy is doing post-production, why wouldn't either one of them take out the production? Or the direction of the production. That blows my mind.
Because I think it adds flavor.
I guess so. And there's people like you that like it, and you like the show more than I do. So maybe they know their audience.
Probably.
All right. Other than that, production values in general.
Pretty straightforward.
The other thing that stood out to me, and of course this was such an old episode, I didn't really want to give them too much grief for it. But in episode 12, they do live recordings from a flea market,
Which they had never done before.
There are many episodes named Making Hay. Making Hay Part 2, Making Hay Part 3, Making Hay Part 4, I think at least. Are all of those flea market episodes?
No, they're not all the same.
Okay, all right. The first one, though, it's one of Walter's favorite flea markets from his youth. He'd gone there effectively his whole life.
Think about it if you've watched Mallrats. It's the Dirt Mall.
It is the Dirt Mall. That is precisely what the Dirt Mall is. And so he goes, a little handheld recorder in hand, and they have several interviews. Oh, it's terrible quality.
And the interviews aren't great. It's the commentary before, after, and during.
Yes, they would play a couple of seconds of the interview and then stop and discuss it, and play a few seconds more and stop and discuss it.
Because they call each other out. It's like, why would you constantly be asking that question?
Well, and one of my favorite moments comes from this, and we'll get to that in just a second. But so that's your production values. That's audio quality, host likability, production values, and now we're finally going to get to the content itself. The show is rangy, is the only way that I can describe it. You have an episode, as I just said, with Making Hay, where they go and do interviews with a flea market, and that's mostly what the discussion is about.
You have a certain set of segments that don't always show up in every episode, much like our other podcast.
Right. A rotating set of regular segments.
They've got Baron von Flanagan, where he gives you like these crazy statistics or crazy facts. You've got, it used to be called You Hit Learn Something New Every Day. which is their fascination that Hitler, being long dead and long gone, is still making news, not like history news, but things still pop up around this guy that is ridiculous. You've got fat news. There's other ones that you got Puss Hole of the Week. So there's a lot of other segments that don't always make it. Sometimes they make it. Sometimes they all make it. Sometimes none of them make it.
So it's a loosey-goosey show.
Yeah, very much.
Yeah. And the whole tenor of the show can be changed no matter what their plans were if one of them comes in hot about something.
Yes.
And that's kind of fine. I think that's what you expect with most podcasts. And, for most podcasts, it works out pretty well. We'll see how this one works out in just a minute. So that's the way that we break down the show. We talk about those 4 qualities of the show. Once we do that, sometimes we'll try to find maybe our favorite moment. And mine comes from that episode number 12.
Did we talk about all 4?
Yeah. Mine comes from that episode number 12, Making Hay. They're at the flea market. They're talking to several different vendors. And every single time, one of the first questions that Walter asks is, how much money do you make? And of course, nobody wants to answer it.
Yes, they never want to answer any of his questions.
But more than that, every single one of the interviews says some reference to, we're here Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. Those are the days that the flea market is open.
Right.
Brian is listening because he's the one asking the question.
Yes.
And yet even the 3rd and 4th interviewer, he asks, how many days are you here? And they go, we're open Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And he's 5 interviews in. He still can't remember that the place is only, every time Walter calls him out on it, he says, Brian, they're open 3 days a week. We've told you that already. Stop asking about it. But that wasn't even my favorite part of the whole interview. My favorite part of the interview comes when they're talking to the magazine guy. There was a fire at one point several decades ago, and this guy had been here for years and years. He had to abandon his business because of the fire while they rebuilt the place. He moved to a different flea market, and he's regaling this story. He says, I was down at this flea market over on I-5, and very quickly, Walt jumps in and says, no, sir, it was I-9. Corrects the guy on the location of the flea market where this man worked for a year and a half of his job, sir. It blew my mind.
And was right.
Yes, absolutely right. That's all you need to know about Walt Flanagan. That man knows his flea markets.
I love the anger that sometimes happens, or the disappointment that happens between the 3, especially whenever Bry isn't carrying the loader, or when an outside project isn't getting done like it's supposed to happen, and the honesty and no fear they have at confronting each other over it for thousands of people to hear.
What about alternate names for the show?
Walt and the Boys.
A Curmudgeon and His Old Buddy. How about Walt Flanagan's Guide to Modern Life?
No, because it's not modern at all.
No, that's what I'm saying. His guide to modern life is largely how to avoid it and to come buy comic books from his
he's my
shop.
kind of guy. Like he's not into technology. I'm not into technology.
No, Walt is definitely an old school guy. He's got an old school mentality. He's also a hustler, though.
An entrepreneur through and through.
He's a busker, sir. He's gonna be working it.
I also, this is what I also like, because it's something I didn't know from watching Impractical Jokers.
Okay.
That Q used to be a fireman.
Yes. No.
He used to run into burning buildings and save people.
Hearing Q talk like Q talks, you couldn't imagine that he would put his life on the line for somebody else, could you?
No, not that. But seeing Q how Q currently looks.
Oh.
I can't believe that.
I'm
not in great shape at all. In fact, I'm probably not in better shape than Q, but I ain't far from it.
I've seen some firemen, sir. I don't think he would look that out of place at the local firehouse.
I don't know, man.
All right, let's wrap this.
You want to know what my favorite here?
Yes.
I do have a favorite part.
Okay.
At one point recently in the last, I would say 10 to 15 episodes, probably within the last 10, there was a Walt Flanagan and Sunday Jeff episode. They go out to eat maybe the day before, I'm pretty sure it's the day before, and they kind of hash out how they want to run the show. Walt ask Sunday Jeff to do one simple thing, because Sunday Jeff is a huge toy collector. Guy got a problem, right? And he simply wanted Sunday Jeff to either say something old that people can buy that's going to increase in value, or something that's going to come out new that people can buy that's going to increase in value. And oh my gosh, the next 20 minutes of just trying to pull that out of Sunday Jeff is ridiculous.
Once we break down the show for you and explain a little bit about it, tell you how we felt about all the different parts of that podcast, then we try to wrap it up with a rating. Now, we could give a show 4 or 5 stars, like a lot of different reviewers do. We could give a show thumbs up or thumbs down, like Roger and Ebert. No, Roger Ebert and Gene Siskel. There you go, Siskel and Ebert. Or we could do what we do here on Pod on Pod and give it earbuds in. That's how we rate our show. 1 or 2 earbuds.
Are you listening fully? Are you half listening? Are you not listening at all?
Exactly. So I'm going to go first. Tell him Steve Dave to me. Look, as we discussed it here, I realized I liked the show more than I thought I was coming into this review. I thought I was coming to kind of sacrifice it a little bit. Turns out there's a lot about the show that I enjoyed. It's not going to be one that I listen to every week. I can't imagine that I'm going to maintain my subscription as I've got it in my podcast app right now. It is a show, though, that certain people I might be willing to suggest to. So I can't give it like a 0.5. I can't give it a 0. I'm going to say it's a 1 earbud show for me. That's the best I can do.
It is one of the handful of podcasts that I listen to religiously. I don't miss an episode of it. Whatever it is that attracted me to has hooked me in. I'm in a fly trap of TESD and I can't get out. So for me, it's 2 earbuds, man.
All right, there's the ratings from Pod on Pod for Tell 'em Steve Dave. Don't forget you can find more about the show and you can download the show itself at smodcast.com. Just look for Tell 'em Steve Dave. When you want to look for us, you can find us at podonpod.com. And by the way, there's a brand new revision to the website coming. You're going to get even more info about us and even easier access to all of our old reviews. Check that out at podonpod.com. And don't forget to comment on your favorite episodes, whether you liked our review, disagreed with our review, whether you found your new favorite podcast. We'd love to hear all of that stuff and more. You can find us on Twitter, Facebook, pretty much all those places. Pod on Pod. Just search for that. And don't forget to rate us and review us in iTunes and Stitcher. Josh, you got anything to add?
Nope.
All right. Well, until next week, I'm Joel.
And I'm Josh. Tell him, Joel and Josh.
Are you wanting something funny? Are you wanting something smart? A show on astral projection or the history of art? Do you want to learn a language or how to play guitar? Just leave it up to Joel and Josh. Pod on pod. Pod on pod.
Pod on Pod is a proud member of the Procast Network, a ProCreate production. ProCreate is a community of artists in film, music, the digital arts, and fine arts that helps connect and collaborate on projects. You can find out more at www.teamprocreate.com. For more great podcasts from the Procast Network, try Movie Buzzed. Join your host, Zach, every episode on the Movie Buzzed podcast for good friends, a good movie, and a great buzz. The Pod on Pod theme song is written and performed by Adam Dale. Find his music in iTunes and more information about him on our website. Our musical guest this week is Axel Nova.